The morning shift was just starting at Earth's Deep Space Listening Post when Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison heard something that would change everything. He was drinking his third cup of coffee, staring at rows of blinking monitors that usually showed nothing but empty space and cosmic background noise. Most days, the job was boring. Today was different. The distress signal came through fuzzy at first, breaking up across the vast distances of space. Jake turned up the volume and leaned forward, his coffee forgotten as a desperate voice filled the control room. Far away on a planet called Kepler 442b, the Zilani were running out of time. These weren't warriors or soldiers. They were scholars, teachers, and philosophers who had never hurt anyone. Their world was covered in beautiful crystal cities that sparkled in the light of their distant sun. For thousands of years, they had lived in peace, studying the stars and writing poetry about the beauty of the universe. But now those crystal cities were dark, hiding under massive energy shields that flickered and sparked with each passing hour. Above their world, enormous alien warships hung in space like hungry vultures. The ships were huge, easily 10 times larger than anything humans had ever built. They belonged to something called the Korthak Empire, and they had come to claim the Zilani world as their own. Governor Veltar stood in his command center, watching the shield readouts drop steadily. He was old, even by Zilani standards, his crystalline body showing the wear of centuries spent in peaceful study. His people looked to him for answers, but he had none to give. The Zilani had never needed weapons. They had never learned to fight. They were like sheep surrounded by wolves, with nowhere to run. The governor's voice shook as he recorded the message that would travel across the galaxy. He knew it was probably hopeless. The Galactic Council had peacekeeping ships, but they were weeks away. By the time help arrived, his people would be dead or enslaved. Still, he had to try. Back on Earth, Jake Morrison sat up straighter as he heard the full message. The Zilani were peaceful. They had no military, no weapons, no way to defend themselves. They were asking anyone, everyone, for help. The desperation in the alien's voice was clear, even across the language barriers. Jake looked around the monitoring station. His shift supervisor was asleep in his chair. The other technicians were playing cards or reading books. None of them had heard the message. For a moment, Jake hesitated. Earth was new to the galactic community. They were supposed to follow rules, stay in their assigned areas, not cause trouble. But someone was dying out there. Someone was asking for help. Jake's fingers moved across his console, routing the signal to Admiral Beth Reynolds on the UES Defiance. Reynolds was tough as nails, a veteran who had fought in the brutal wars on Mars decades ago. If anyone would understand what needed to be done, it would be her. The Defiance was patrolling the outer edges of human space with 2 other ships. They were part of Earth's small but growing fleet, ships designed to be fast and deadly. Other alien races looked down on human technology, calling it primitive and crude. What they didn't understand was that everything on Earth was designed to survive in hell. Admiral Reynolds listened to the Zilani distress call twice. Her bridge crew gathered around her, waiting for orders. Commander Tom Bradley, her tactical officer, pulled up star charts showing their position. Captain Mike Davis, who led their fighter squadrons, checked his weapons systems. Lieutenant Sarah Chen at communications kept the channel open, listening for any updates from the dying world. Reynolds made her decision in less than 30 seconds. She had spent her whole career protecting people, first on Mars and now among the stars. She wasn't about to stop now just because some bureaucrats said it wasn't her job. The 3 human ships changed course immediately, their engines burning at maximum power as they raced toward the Kepler system. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and operating outside their authority. But they were human, and humans had a simple rule: when someone calls for help, you answer. As they jumped into hyperspace, none of them knew they were about to give the galaxy its first real lesson in what it meant to be human. Space rippled and tore as 3 human warships burst out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler system. The UES Defiance led the charge, followed closely by the UES Retribution and UES Warhammer. They weren't pretty ships by galactic standards. No smooth curves or glowing energy fields. Just angular gray metal covered in weapon ports and sensor arrays. They looked exactly like what they were, killing machines built by a species that had learned warfare the hard way. The Korthak blockade was already in position around the Zalani homeworld. 12 massive ships hung in space like sleeping giants. Each one was the size of a small city, their bioorganic hulls pulsing with strange lights that ran along their surfaces like veins. The aliens had grown their ships rather than built them, using living tissue that could heal itself and adapt to damage. To most galactic civilizations, these ships represented the height of military technology. Admiral Beth Reynolds stood on the bridge of the Defiance, her weathered hands gripping the command rail. She had seen plenty of battles in her 53 years, starting as a young Marine on Mars and working her way up through the ranks. The scars on her left arm told the story of a plasma blast that should have killed her during the Martian uprising. Instead, it just made her tougher. Around her, the bridge crew worked with quiet efficiency. Commander Tom Bradley hunched over his tactical display, already calculating firing solutions. The young officer had grown up on Luna, where his parents had died in a mining accident. He joined the Navy to protect others from the same kind of helplessness he had felt as a child. Next to him, Lieutenant Anna Chen monitored communications, her fingers dancing across holographic controls. She was third-generation military, following in the footsteps of grandparents who had fought in the water wars back on Earth. Captain Mike Davis coordinated from the fighter bay, where 24 pilots were already strapped into their cockpits. These weren't the sleek, energy-based fighters used by other species. Human fighters were small, fast, and carried enough firepower to cripple ships 10 times their size. Davis himself was a former test pilot who had volunteered for the most dangerous missions humanity could devise. The Korthak noticed the human ships immediately. On the bridge of their flagship, Commander Vex Thul studied the newcomers with amusement. His species had conquered 17 star systems over the past century, absorbing worlds and civilizations into their ever-growing empire. These 3 small ships looked like toys compared to his massive fleet. The transmission came through in the typical arrogant tone the Korthak used with inferior species. Their translator made the alien commander's voice sound cold and mechanical, but the message was clear: leave now or die. Vex Thul expected the humans to turn around and run, just like most species did when faced with Korthak military might. Instead, Admiral Reynolds stepped forward and opened a channel to the entire enemy fleet. Her voice was calm, steady, and carried the weight of someone who had never backed down from a fight in her entire life. She identified herself and her ships, then delivered an ultimatum that sent shockwaves through the Korthak command structure. 10 minutes. That was all she was giving them. 10 minutes to pack up their invasion force and leave the peaceful Zalani alone. If they refused, the humans would treat them as enemies. It was the kind of bold, insane declaration that only a species of Deathworlders would make when outnumbered 4-1. The Korthak commander's laughter echoed across every communication channel. He found the human audacity hilarious. These primitive creatures with their crude metal ships actually thought they could challenge the might of an empire that had crushed worlds. He broadcast his response to his entire fleet, making sure every ship could hear him mock the foolish humans. The Korthak had studied human technology from intercepted signals and debris. Their weapons used simple kinetic energy and chemical explosives, technology that most civilized species had abandoned thousands of years ago. How could such primitive tools threaten ships protected by bioadaptive armor and energy shields? It was like threatening a tank with a stone axe. What the aliens didn't understand was that humans had been perfecting the art of killing for their entire evolutionary history. Every human weapon was tested in the crucible of Earth's violent environment, refined through countless wars and conflicts. They might look simple, but they worked with brutal efficiency. Admiral Reynolds listened to the Korthak commander's mocking laughter without expression. She had heard similar arrogance from enemies before. Martian rebels, asteroid pirates, corporate security forces, they all made the same mistake of underestimating humanity. They all learned the truth eventually, usually right before they died. She looked at Tom Bradley and gave him a single nod. The tactical officer's fingers moved across his controls, sending targeting data to every human ship in the fleet. Missile tubes loaded. Railguns powered up. Fighter squadrons prepared for launch. The 10-minute countdown had begun, but everyone on the human ships knew the Korthak wouldn't surrender. They were about to learn why humanity had earned its reputation as the most dangerous species in the galaxy. The 10 minutes were up, and Admiral Reynolds kept her word. At exactly 0800 hours ship time, the human fleet opened fire. What happened next would be talked about in alien military academies for generations to come. The first wave of missiles launched from the Defiance looked ordinary enough to the Korthak observers. Simple chemical rockets with conventional warheads, the kind of weapons their energy shields had been designed to stop. Commander Vexthul barely glanced at his defensive displays as his ship's automated systems prepared to swat the primitive projectiles out of space. But these weren't ordinary missiles. Each one carried a fusion warhead guided by an artificial intelligence that had been trained using data from every battle humanity had ever fought. The AI knew how to predict enemy movements, how to slip through defensive patterns, and most importantly, how to exploit weaknesses that other species never even considered. The missiles moved in unpredictable spirals, changing course dozens of times per second. They used the system's magnetic fields to alter their trajectories, bounced off asteroid surfaces to come at targets from impossible angles, and coordinated with each other in ways that made the Korthak defensive computers crash from overload. When the energy shields tried to stop them, the missiles simply adjusted their approach until they found gaps in the protection. The first fusion detonation lit up space like a new star being born. The Korthak flagship's bioarmor, which had been grown to resist energy weapons and plasma blasts, simply vaporized under the intense heat and radiation. Secondary explosions rippled through the ship's organic hull as its own biological systems turned against it. But the missiles were just the opening act. The real surprise came from the human railguns. Every species in the galaxy had abandoned kinetic weapons centuries ago. Why throw rocks when you could fire energy beams that moved at the speed of light? The answer became brutally clear as tungsten rods, each one weighing several tons, slammed into Korthak ships at nearly 20% of light speed. The physics were simple and devastating. When you accelerate mass to those kinds of velocities, nothing can stop it. The bioarmor that had protected Korthak ships for generations crumpled like paper. Energy shields designed to deflect plasma beams were useless against solid matter moving that fast. The kinetic rounds punched straight through ship after ship, leaving perfectly round holes that vented atmosphere and crew into the vacuum of space. Commander Vexthul stared at his tactical displays in shock as his fleet fell apart around him. 3 of his ships were already dead, their bioluminescent hull markings flickering out like dying fireflies. 2 more were venting atmosphere from massive hull breaches. His own flagship was listing badly, its organic control system screaming in pain from the damage. How is this possible? He broadcast to his surviving ships. Their weapons are primitive. They use chemical explosives and metal projectiles. On the bridge of the Defiance, Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison watched the battle unfold with grim satisfaction. He had been the first person to hear the Zalani distress call, and now he was witnessing humanity's response. The young officer stood next to Captain Lisa Park, the ship's executive officer, both of them studying the tactical displays as alien ships died one by one. "They don't understand," Jake said quietly, watching another Korthak vessel break apart under railgun fire. "They think primitive means ineffective." Captain Park nodded, her eyes never leaving the display. She was a veteran of the Belt Wars, where human miners had fought off corporate security forces using improvised weapons and sheer determination. They've been fighting civilized species for so long, they forgot what real warfare looks like. The truth was brutal but simple. Most galactic civilizations had evolved on peaceful worlds with gentle environments. When they developed space travel, they brought their civilized approach to warfare with them. Battles were fought with elegant energy weapons at long range, following rules and protocols that kept casualties to a minimum. Humans were different. Earth had tried to kill them for millions of years. The planet's gravity was crushing, the atmosphere was poison to most species, radiation from their sun caused cancer, and every other life form competed for the same resources. Humanity had learned to fight by fighting everything, the environment, other species, and eventually each other. Their weapons reflected that harsh reality. Human missiles didn't just explode, they adapted and learned from each engagement. Human railguns didn't just fire projectiles, they launched guided rounds that could change course and target weak points. Human ships didn't just carry weapons, they were weapons, designed to ram through enemy formations if necessary. The Defiance demonstrated this philosophy as it dove into the asteroid field surrounding the Kepler system. Most alien species avoided asteroid fields, considering them too dangerous for military operations. The shifting rocks and unpredictable gravity wells made navigation nearly impossible for crews that had evolved in stable environments. But humans had grown up dodging asteroids in the belt, mining in the unstable gravity wells around Jupiter, and flying through the debris fields left over from their own wars. Captain Park guided her ship through the rocks like she was driving down a familiar street, using the asteroids as cover while her weapons crews lined up perfect shots on the confused Korthak ships. The alien vessels tried to follow, but their crews couldn't handle the crushing acceleration changes required to navigate the field. Several ships collided with asteroids, their bioarmor cracking under impacts that human ships routinely survived. Others got caught in gravity wells and spun helplessly while human missiles found them. Within 20 minutes of the first shot, the Korthak blockade was broken. Half their ships were destroyed, the rest were crippled and leaking atmosphere. Their bioluminescent weapon systems flickered weakly as their organic hulls died around them. Commander Vexthul finally understood what his empire had encountered. These weren't just another species with better technology. These were predators from a world that had taught them to turn everything into a weapon. They had just met the apex survivors of a planet that specialized in producing killers. The victory celebration on the human ships lasted exactly 37 seconds. That's when the sensor alarms started screaming as hyperspace tiers began opening all around the Kepler system. The Korthak Empire had sent reinforcements, and they were arriving in overwhelming numbers. Commander Tom Bradley's voice was steady but grim as he read off the sensor data. "Admiral, I'm counting 30 contacts, no, wait. 40. 50. His fingers flew across the tactical display as more ships kept appearing. 53 confirmed vessels, including multiple battleship-class targets. They've got us outnumbered 17-1. On any other day, against any other enemy, those odds would mean certain death. Most military commanders would have ordered an immediate retreat, hoping to escape before the enemy could surround them. But Admiral Reynolds had not spent 40 years in the service to run away from a fight, especially when innocent people were counting on them. She looked around her bridge at the faces of her crew. These were men and women who had volunteered to serve on the frontier, knowing they might face situations exactly like this one. They had grown up hearing stories of impossible odds overcome by human determination. Their grandparents had held the line at Mars. Their parents had fought off pirate fleets in the asteroid belt. Now it was their turn to prove that humanity didn't know how to quit. "All ships, implement Doctrine 7, Reynolds announced calmly. The bridge crew exchanged glances. Doctrine 7 was the most aggressive tactical protocol in the human military handbook. It was designed for situations where conventional warfare had failed and desperate measures were the only option left. Tom Bradley nodded grimly and began entering commands. "Boarding pods ready, Admiral. Marines are suiting up." What happened next would redefine space combat for every species in the galaxy. Instead of trying to match the Korthak fleet ship for ship, the humans did something that seemed completely insane: they used the entire star system as their weapon. The first part of the plan involved the asteroid belt. Human engineers had always been good at improvising, and space combat brought out their most creative instincts. Using precisely timed explosions, the human ships began nudging asteroids out of their orbits, sending house-sized chunks of rock careening toward the enemy fleet at tremendous speeds. The Korthak had sophisticated point defense systems designed to stop missiles and energy blasts, but they had never encountered enemies crazy enough to throw entire asteroids at them. The massive rocks slammed into alien ships with the force of nuclear weapons, crushing bioarmor and organic hulls that had been grown to withstand conventional attacks. But the asteroids were just the beginning. The humans had noticed that the Kepler system contained a gas giant with several large moons. Using gravitational physics that most species considered too dangerous to attempt in combat, human missiles began using the planet as a slingshot, accelerating to incredible speeds before arcing back toward enemy targets from completely unexpected angles. The Korthak fleet found itself under attack from every direction at once. Missiles appeared from behind planets, asteroids crashed into their formations, and human ships seemed to materialize out of nowhere using tactics that defied conventional military thinking. When several Korthak cruisers tried to close the distance and overwhelm the humans with superior numbers, they walked into the final part of Doctrine 7, boarding actions. Most civilized species had abandoned boarding enemy ships centuries ago. It was considered barbaric and unnecessarily dangerous. Why risk your own people in hand-to-hand combat when you could simply destroy enemy vessels from a safe distance? The humans had a different philosophy. Sometimes you needed to get up close and personal. Sergeant First Class Danny Wright led the first boarding party as their assault pod punched through the hull of a Korthak cruiser. The pod's shaped charges blew a perfect hole in the alien ship's bioarmor, and Wright's Marines poured through the breach like an unstoppable flood. Wright himself was a veteran of 3 different planetary conflicts, a man who had learned urban warfare in the ruins of Detroit and jungle fighting in the Amazon colonies. His squad was made up of similar warriors, men and women who had volunteered for the most dangerous assignments the military could offer. The Korthak crew had never seen anything like them. These humans moved through the alien corridors like armored predators, their weapons chattering as they cleared room after room. They carried shotguns loaded with specialized ammunition designed to work in zero gravity, plasma cutters that could slice through bulkheads, and grenades that could disable entire sections of ship. The aliens tried to fight back, but they were completely outclassed. The Korthak had evolved on a peaceful garden world where the most dangerous predator was roughly equivalent to a Earth rabbit. They had never developed the killer instincts that humans took for granted. Wright's team moved with practiced efficiency, following tactics developed during humanity's bloodiest conflicts. They used the ship's own architecture against its crew, turning corridors into kill zones and using the aliens' unfamiliarity with their own vessel's layout to set up devastating ambushes. Within an hour, 3 Korthak ships had been captured from the inside. Their crews were either dead or surrendering, begging for mercy from enemies they couldn't understand. How could any species be so comfortable with violence? How could they turn their own bodies into weapons of war? Admiral Kethvar, the newly arrived Korthak commander, watched his fleet dissolve into chaos and transmitted a desperate message to his remaining ships. His voice cracked with disbelief and terror as he tried to understand what was happening to his forces. The response came directly from Admiral Reynolds, broadcast on an open channel so every ship in both fleets could hear it. Her words were simple, direct, and carried the weight of 4 billion years of evolutionary pressure. Admiral, you asked how our species survives being this violent. The answer is simple: we didn't have a choice. Everything on our world spent millions of years trying to kill us. The gravity tried to crush us. The atmosphere tried to poison us. Every other living thing tried to eat us or infect us or hunt us down. We learned to fight back because fighting back was the only way to survive. She paused, letting the translation systems carry her words to every alien ear in the system. You've conquered 17 systems full of peaceful species who never learned how to really fight. Today, you met a species that never learned how to quit. The choice is yours: surrender now, or find out what humans do when we stop holding back. The battle was over, and space around the Kepler system looked like a graveyard. 37 Korthak ships floated dead in the void, their bioluminescent hulls dark and cold. The remaining 16 vessels drifted helplessly, atmosphere leaking from countless holes, their organic weapon systems dying like flowers in winter. Admiral Kethvar sat in his command chair, staring at displays that showed the complete destruction of his fleet. Ships that had conquered 17 star systems lay broken around him. The pride of the Korthak Empire had been shattered by 3 human vessels in less than 6 hours. His hands shook as he opened a communication channel to the human fleet. The words came out in a whisper, barely audible above the sound of emergency klaxons and dying machinery throughout his ship. "We surrender," he transmitted, his voice carrying the weight of absolute defeat. "Please, terrifying Deathworlders, show mercy. We yield all claims to this system. We yield all claims to conquest. Please, let us live." What happened next shocked everyone listening to the communication channels. Instead of demanding the aliens' complete destruction or humiliation, Admiral Reynolds immediately ordered her fleet to begin rescue operations. "All ships, begin emergency aid procedures," she announced. "Medical teams to the Korthak vessels. Engineering crews, transmit repair schematics to help them patch their hulls. We're getting these people home safely." Commander Tom Bradley looked up from his tactical station in surprise. "Admiral, these are enemy combatants. They invaded a peaceful system and threatened innocent civilians." Reynolds nodded calmly. "They were enemy combatants, Tom. Now they're survivors who need help. There's a difference." The human response teams moved with the same efficiency they had shown in battle, but now they were saving lives instead of taking them. Medical shuttles launched from all 3 human ships, carrying doctors and emergency supplies to the crippled Korthak vessels. Engineers worked around the clock to help patch hull breaches and restore life support systems. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, who had first heard the Zalani distress call, found himself aboard a damaged Korthak cruiser, helping coordinate the rescue efforts. The alien crew watched him work with expressions of complete bewilderment. These were the same humans who had been trying to kill them just hours before, and now they were risking their own lives to save Korthak survivors. On the surface of Kepler 442b, the Zalani colonists emerged from their underground shelters for the first time in days. Governor Veltar stood in his crystal palace, looking up at the stars where the sounds of battle had finally stopped. His people were safe, saved by strangers from a distant world called Earth. A holographic communication link connected him directly to Admiral Reynolds on the Defiance. The governor's crystalline body shimmered with emotions that had no translation in human language: gratitude, confusion, and a deep respect for beings he was only beginning to understand. "Admiral Reynolds," he began, his voice carrying the formal tones of diplomatic protocol. "Our people owe you a debt that can never be repaid. But I must ask, why? Why did your ships come so far? Why did your people risk everything for strangers you had never met? We are not even the same species. We share no history, no alliance, no treaty." Reynolds looked tired. The battle had aged her, adding new lines to a face already weathered by decades of military service. But when she smiled, her expression carried the warmth that had made her a beloved commander among her crews. "Governor," she said with that distinctly human gesture of lifting her shoulders, "someone sent out a distress call. We heard it. We answered. That's what neighbors do." The simplicity of the answer hit the governor like a physical blow. In those few words, Reynolds had summarized something fundamental about humanity that other species were only beginning to grasp. Humans didn't help others because of treaties or political calculations. They helped because it was the right thing to do. As the human fleet prepared to leave the system, escorting the damaged Korthak ships to safe territory, news of the battle spread across the galaxy at the speed of hyperspace communication. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session to discuss what had happened at Kepler 442b. The official report, filed by a council observer who had monitored the entire engagement, became one of the most widely read documents in galactic history. Its conclusions would reshape how every species viewed humanity for generations to come. The human response to the Zelani crisis reveals fundamental misunderstandings about this species, the report began. We classified them as Deathworlders due to their planet's hostile environment and violent history. We assumed this made them dangerous to galactic peace. We were wrong. The report went on to detail the tactical brilliance of the human fleet, their willingness to fight impossible odds, and most importantly, their treatment of defeated enemies and rescued civilians. The humans do not simply survive their harsh world, the document concluded. They have weaponized the very concept of survival itself. Their protective instincts extend beyond their own species to include anyone they perceive as innocent or threatened. They will fight for strangers with the same ferocity they show defending their families. This makes them the most dangerous species in the galaxy to threaten, but also the most valuable as allies. The final paragraph would be quoted in diplomatic circles for centuries. Recommendation to all council members: never give humanity a reason to consider you a threat to innocent life. But if you find yourself in need of protection, there is no better ally in the known galaxy. The age of human diplomacy has begun, and it is founded on a simple principle that may reshape galactic civilization: when someone calls for help, humans will answer. Back on Earth, Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison returned to his monitoring station with a new understanding of his job. He still listened to the signals from deep space, still tracked the movements of ships and the chatter of distant civilizations. But now he knew that somewhere out there, other species were learning what it meant to have humans as neighbors. The galaxy would never be the same, and that was exactly how humanity liked it.